Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good evening. As a suspected spy is found in the Palace of Westminster, we ask, is China a threat? And if it is, what on earth is government policy towards China? Because frankly, I just don't know what it is. An idea being floated by some Conservative members of Parliament that school leavers who don't get basic GCSEs and don't get above 3 E grades at A-level maybe shouldn't qualify for student loans. Maybe they'd be better off doing apprenticeships and earning a lot more money. And we go down to the New Forest, where a new vigilante group has been set up. They've lost complete faith in the police. We'll find out in Lyndhurst and villages around it what Operation Sherlock is all about. But before that, let's get the news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Nigel, thank you and good evening. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister has told the House of Commons the sanctity of Westminster must be protected following Chinese spy allegations. It comes after an unnamed parliamentary researcher who was arrested in March issued a statement saying he is completely innocent. Rishi Sunak, who's been facing calls to designate China as a national security threat, told MPs such actions will not be tolerated.
The whole House is rightly appalled about reports of espionage in this building. The sanctity of this place must be protected, and the right of members to speak their minds without fear or sanction must be maintained. We will defend our democracy and our security. So I was emphatic with Premier Lee that actions which seek to undermine British democracy are completely unacceptable and will never be tolerated.
Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has called on the Prime Minister to reveal what he knew and when.
China is a strategic challenge, that's for sure, and what we need is a policy that is clear and is settled. Now, we haven't had that for the last 10 years. We've had division and inconsistency from this government. But I think this morning, there's a very big question now for the Prime Minister, which is, was this raised when these arrests took place back in March? Or has it only been raised now that it's come into the public domain? I think that's the central question that needs to be answered by the Prime Minister today.
In other news, GB News sources have confirmed terror suspect Daniel Khalif has been taken to Belmarsh High Security Prison. The 21-year-old appeared in court today, charged after escaping from Wandsworth Prison last week. He was arrested on Saturday after a 4-day manhunt. Westminster Magistrates Court was told the former soldier allegedly escaped by strapping himself to a food delivery vehicle using material which may have been bedsheets. Khalif disappeared while awaiting trial after being charged with terror offences in January. Administrators have said a further 9,100 Wilko employees will be made redundant by early October. It comes after a last-ditch bailout by HMV failed. The company had been in discussions to buy around 200 stores. The first 24 outlets are now scheduled to shut their doors tomorrow. And finally, pubs in England and Wales can continue selling takeaway pints as relaxed licensing rules have now been extended. The rules were brought in to help pubs during COVID lockdowns. Pubs can keep on selling pints until March 2025. They were meant to end this month after having been extended twice. Policing Minister Chris Philp says it's vital that we do everything we can to support British pubs. You're up to date on GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying Play GB News. Now it's back to Nigel.
Good evening. Espionage at the heart of the Palace of Westminster. Well, in some ways, perhaps we shouldn't be that surprised because, let's face it, governments of all colours spy on each other, and they always have. And let's be honest, the British have been rather good at spying over the years. But this is another potential China threat. You may remember, just going back a few months, Barry Gardiner, a Labour MP, had received a great deal of money given towards his office running and expenses from a woman, Christine Lee, who was very closely associated with the Chinese Communist Party. What we saw on the front page of the Sunday Times yesterday was a young 28-year-old researcher said to be linked to some really quite senior Conservative members of Parliament. Now, he today has put out some pretty fierce denials, but it doesn't get away from the fact that we do need to talk about China more and, frankly, more honestly, because what really shocks me here is this man, plus one other, were arrested back in March of this year. Why has it been kept quiet for all of this time? And what was James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, thinking in visiting Beijing just a couple of weeks back? In the light of this evidence, why didn't he make a public fuss about it? Some will say, well, of course, if that was done, it would prejudice a future trial. But I think these things actually need, as a matter of public interest, to be talked about and to be debated. And then there's the question of Rishi Sunak. I mean, you saw the clip on the news of him in the House of Commons, but this is the man, when he was running to become leader of the Conservative Party and therefore Prime Minister, he didn't win, Liz Truss did, but described China as a threat. But now that's been downgraded. China apparently now is a systematic challenge. Well, I think Ken McCallum, the boss of MI5, takes it all rather more seriously. He said in a very unusual speech last year that the National Cyber Security Centre had defended the UK against a record number of what he described as cyber security incidents targeted at healthcare, vaccine development and much else. And he was perfectly clear that China was a threat. So let me ask you, is China a threat? Give me your thoughts, farage@gbnews.com, because I most definitely think that it is. And I feel we just don't have any proper leadership from our government. And my worry is there are just too many people in high positions in British society over the course of the last 10 years who have enriched themselves on the back of our growing trade with China, so much so that much of this tends to get brushed under the carpet. Well, joining me is Dr. Elizabeth Stevens, Managing Director at Geopolitical Risk Advisory, and you go around the world, I know, giving people advice on risk, advice on countries based on data. I made the point there, Elizabeth, that, actually, spying itself is not unusual. But it is it not, the increased role of China in many of these activities, as highlighted by the boss of MI5, that we should be concerned about?
We should be concerned about it going forward. China has risen as a global power, is looking to expand its influence, and the tech sector is the new battleground. I mean, the lines are clearly drawn between the US and China in this space. The UK is a US ally. It's reasonable to assume that's where we will align ourselves. And I think the risk China poses to our security through tech and cyber espionage has been underestimated.
Funny, though, isn't it? We're quite slow on this. I mean, take Huawei, the telecoms company.
Yes.
You know, when the Trump administration had made clear they would not be allowing Huawei into American networks, Boris Johnson's government made a decision to say that they could be allowed into our networks, only later to change their minds. And this is the point that I'm making, that it seems that Chinese influence, and dare I say Chinese money, has changed the minds of many senior people in our country.
It does seem to, doesn't it? Because in terms of Huawei, if we'd allowed the company to be involved in the development of 5G, then their tech is in our systems. At any point in the future, should China wish to spy on us, should it wish to turn off those systems, it could do at the flip of a switch. But the challenge the UK government faces is how do we develop our infrastructure? Where do we go for investment if we cut China out of that loop? And economic imperatives, both national level and for personal enrichment, has taken precedence over thinking about China as a potential threat.
So let's just remind people. Let's remind people of the extent to which, you mentioned infrastructure and key industries. So China has bought a significant stake in British steelmaking.
Yes.
China is the main partner with the development of a nuclear power station down at Hinkley Point. What other areas can you think of where China is pumping in money?
Oh, it's pumping in money to broader infrastructure development, rails, roads. They're involved in all of this. The next area, the water supply. I mean, they do own shares in our water companies. Yep. They're in big shares in the banking sector. And just think about real estate. In London, in particular, if we look at all these flats that are being built, so many are being purchased by Chinese investors.
Let alone university colleges who've become completely reliant on money coming from China.
Which enables China then to influence the curriculum and what is taught in those universities.
Yeah, and they are doing it.
And they are doing it.
So, Elizabeth, where are we? We've got a Prime Minister, I mentioned this in my talking, but it's worth saying again, I think. He begins by calling China a threat. He then says it's a systematic challenge. Where are we today? Because I don't know.
He dialed back on it, didn't he? He made the statement and then thought, where does that leave us? Because we do need a pragmatic approach to China. It is the world's second largest economy. Engagement and talking to China is important. But we need to do that against a backdrop of understanding how China could be a threat to us in the future and its growing influence in our systems. So inviting China to invest in non-strategic activities is perhaps acceptable, but why would we have them investing in our technology sector,
and that's what
for example?
And if you were advising the government, that's what you'd say?
That's what I'd say. And I'd also look at America's policy at the moment. China has huge investments in the United States, but America is pushing back against that now. And China and the US are technically at war in the tech sector. I mean, it hasn't been confirmed yet, but it looks like China is now preventing state employees from using Apple phones. It's part of the tech battle. Yeah. I mean, it's coincidental, isn't it? The Huawei is bringing out an equivalent of the iPhone. I believe it's next week. But the lines are clearly drawn. We have to decide which side we're on.
Yeah, well, I think we do, and we haven't made our minds up on that. We're all over the place on it. Talking about China itself, this rapid economic rise has rather hit the buffers over the course of the last few months. Youth unemployment, the last official figure, 21%. I bet it's actually higher in reality.
I'm sure it is. They've stopped publishing figures now.
I know. I've been studying China very closely. If there are big internal economic problems in China because of a massively over-geared and over-borrowed property market predominantly, my view, Elizabeth, is that that makes a Chinese invasion of Taiwan next year more likely, not less likely. Am I being too pessimistic?
I think you're being too pessimistic. I think that's a couple of years too early. But Xi Jinping has said 2027, and we have to remember the Chinese are very cautious. They will only invade if they can almost guarantee it will be successful. And that would potentially take us to the brink of nuclear war. And I think we need to be realistic about why Taiwan is so important to the West, not just the US. It isn't just that it is a democracy. It is that it is the home of advanced semiconductor manufacturing in the form of TSMC. Should there be a blockade of Taiwan by China, I think that's far more likely at the moment than a full-scale invasion. The impact on the capitalist system will be immense.
Is it 60% of the world's chips are still manufactured in Taiwan?
And 90 to 95% of the most advanced chips. And that's what we need for next generation tech.
I mean, that is
and that's what the real battle over Taiwan is about. There is a silicon shield that is protecting Taiwan. It's just a question of how enduring that shield is. And that's partly why the US is ramping up the building of fabs in the US to diminish the impact should China move more forcefully against Taiwan.
This president's changed China completely, hasn't he? President Xi,
he has.
In 10 years, up until 2012, we knew it was a growing economic powerhouse. We knew that it predominantly looked within.
Yes.
And it's since President Xi took power, we've seen a massive naval build-up, a huge naval build-up.
Huge.
And now clearly stated territorial expansionist aims, and him saying to the 90 million members of the Chinese Communist Party, prepare for the great struggle ahead.
Now, whether we interpret struggle as a personal struggle, frugality is being emphasised by Xi now in terms of economic expenditure consumption, or whether we mean great struggle in terms of war, we have to be careful not to put a Western conception of that onto what he is saying, because an invasion of Taiwan is a huge game changer. I think next year is too early. But, China has been changing for years. The West, I think, made a mistake assuming that once China was integrated into the economic system as a member of the WTO, it would automatically democratise. That isn't China.
We got it wrong.
We got it wrong. And that's why we have such a challenge with China now. It is not a democracy. It is not going to become a democracy. No. That doesn't mean we can't work proactively with them, but let's not fool ourselves. I mean, look at what's happened to Hong Kong.
No better example needed.
Exactly.
Elizabeth Stevens, thank you for joining me on this great debate. And really, in short, what Elizabeth is saying there is, government, please make up your minds. Let's have a clear policy towards China, not this current mess. In a minute, I'm going to talk to you about the rule of law. Let's find out, what does it actually mean? And why is it that quite senior groups of lawyers think this government is behaving very badly? Is it a fair criticism or not?
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "No, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Some of your thoughts from home towards the question, is China a threat? One viewer says, of course it is. The trouble is, our government is fixated on Ukraine and net zero, whilst China amasses a monumental army and navy. The politicians are oblivious. Mary says, China is a threat to the world, not just to us. And another viewer says, China is slowly swallowing up the world. Well, they were, but they do have currently some really, I think, potentially quite serious economic problems, which may just put a block on them swallowing up the world, but I worry ever more about Taiwan. A report out today by Justice, a legal charity called The State We're In, and it talks about the rule of law. Now, it's a phrase that you hear and you read about all the time, but what actually is it? Well, let's attempt to find out. I'm joined by Sir Robert Buckland MP, South Swindon Member of Parliament, former Lord Chancellor, Justice Secretary. The rule of law, what is it? Come on, in simple English.
Right, well, it's different from the law itself. It's a political idea that has underpinned our democracy and our parliamentary democracy for centuries. It's the belief that people should be equal before the law. Be you ne'er so high, the law is above you. And that means, as well, you need an independent judicial system and independent lawyers as well to represent people without fear or favour in a way that I think you and I recognise as a fair system. That's what the rule of law is all about.
Robert, when I see the politicised judiciary in America, I'm horrified by it.
Exactly right.
So I think this balance that we've built up and developed over centuries is the right one, and I have no doubt about that, and we're completely at one on that.
Yeah.
This report, however, I mean, this is typical legal profession, condemning the government over the Illegal Migration Act, condemning the government over Rwanda. I mean, you know, to say that this government has acted effectively beyond the rule of law. What you're really talking about here, isn't this at the heart, really, of the new big next legal debate? Brexit's done, to a certain extent. This really, it seems what divides everybody is ECHR. Now, you're a strong proponent of us being part of the European Convention on Human Rights. I'm not, as you know. I think it's past its sell-by date. But isn't this report just condemning the government on the basis that you and Justice think we should be following the ECHR to the letter?
Well, to be fair, I mean, it's a report produced by a group of people. I'm on the Council of Justice. I don't happen to actually agree with all of it. Some of the bills, some of the acts of Parliament were ones that I put through, and I can tell you now that I do not feel we're breaching the rule of law. However, which I think I take your point fully and frankly on board. I mean, there will be elements of this which actually are politics as opposed to something seriously constitutional. However, I'll say this: I think the tendency of modern government is to legislate in haste, to rush to do things because the pressures that governments are on to just get stuff done. And that can mean that shortcuts are taken, that there isn't the scrutiny that there needs to be, that too many powers are taken, perhaps because government's a little vague about what it wants to do. And that, bit by bit, means that the executive takes too much power. And that's what concerns me.
This is where we're at one. I mean, the energy bill that went through last week, the third reading, and it's got to go through the Lords, basically giving the Secretary of State powers to, through statutory instruments, put through what could potentially be criminal measures. I found that quite shocking.
Yeah, now, criminal measures should not be the subject of secondary legislation. Of new offences should be the subject of primary legislation.
Yes.
I've always believed that.
Yes.
That's an underlying tenet of how you legislate. But here's the thing, Nigel. It's not just about legislation, it's about regulation as well. And who controls regulation? We have an army of regulators in this country, independent regulators, but who regulates them? How accountable are they to Parliament? I don't think they're nearly accountable enough. And I think we need to see change to bring them before MPs, a bit like the Public Accounts Committee does with civil servants.
I'd love to see that. Now, as the late great leader, founder of the Monster Raving Loony Party, Lord Such used to say, why is there only one Monopolies Commission? Which is kind of the point.
I think you and I both stood against Lord Such. I think he nearly beat me once.
No, I think more scrutiny, as you say, so many of these Quango-type organisations with more power over local businesses actually than Parliament and government have. And now I think that is a real concern out there. Now, let's talk about the law itself.
Yeah.
Devolution. So we have a central government. Yeah. We keep devolving powers. We keep creating new mayors. Seems to me that under devolution, what happens is that the people with the devolved power have to do more than the government does in every area and actually interfere in our lives ever more. And one example of that could be, depending on your point of view, the ULEZ extension out to the edge of Greater London. I'll tell you what interests me, Sir Robert. The campaign of vandalism against these cameras is ongoing. It shows no sign of stopping. Mayor Khan has now employed a fleet of vans to drive around and to attempt to police the cameras. Yeah. But with nearly 3,000 of them, that's almost an impossible job. How do we get to a situation, how do we deal with a situation when a significant group of a population disrespect a law?
Well, I mean, first of all, Nigel, I think you and I would agree that if you're a lawmaker, you can't be a lawbreaker. Yeah. And it's not for people like us to encourage people to break the law. No. However, there is a question about the way in which this particular policy was brought forward. We all want clean air, but do you do that by penalising those who genuinely, have to run older vehicles because of cost, because they're
on a pension or whatever it may be.
They're not able to buy that new car. New cars are expensive. Yeah. And it seems to me that we do have to ask a question about, where you're penalising people in the pocket in that way, is the underlying policy the right one? I think in ULEZ, it's a mistake.
Well, does the law continue to command respect? And while I've got you here, I can't resist this. At the end of this show, we've got a group coming on from Lyndhurst and a village next door called Minstead. This is down on the edge of the New Forest National Park. Beautiful part of the world. Yes. But goodness gracious me, they are suffering the highest percentage of unsolved burglaries of any district of the entire United Kingdom. And it's bad, and it's repeated, and it's organised. And it isn't just shoplifting. A lot of this is rural crime.
Yes.
It's breaking in and nicking lawn mowers and camping equipment from campsites, whatever it may be. Yeah. And this group of people have said, we no longer have any respect for the police whatsoever. They've set up their own vigilante group, Operation Sherlock. How, and you've held senior positions as Lord Chancellor and Justice Secretary. If the people of the New Forest are losing faith in our police, something has gone very badly wrong under 13 years of Tory rule.
Well, I think we should all be concerned about that. First of all, because however well-intentioned, I'm sure these people are very well-intentioned, things can go badly wrong and people could be hurt and worse if you take the law into your own hands.
But they're being hurt anyway.
But I get that, Nigel, which is why I think it's vitally important that those seeing this and hearing about this, the Hampshire Police, the Police and Crime Commissioner down there, need to get to see these residents urgently.
They never see a copper.
Well, this is the thing. What I think is important, and I'm dealing with, a bit of a problem with organised shoplifting in my area. We've had meetings about it. We're trying to help retailers and shopkeepers deal with this scourge because it seems to me that direct action from political leaders is vitally important. And I think in that part of the world, what residents clearly are crying out for is some direct intervention. And if I was Hampshire Police, I'd be working closely with them to try and deal with this spate of unsolved burglaries. It's just not acceptable.
Isn't the truth, Robert Buckland, that in terms of crime, in terms of our society, our levels of respect for each other, we're going downhill, aren't we?
Well, I don't think it's irredeemable, Nigel, and I think...
No, I didn't say it was.
And I think there's a lot of young people out there who are showing admirable qualities that you and I would recognise as very much part of our British way of life. I think it's up to all of us to uphold them. We've all got to be vigilant and we've all got to be good citizens and support each other. I think, yes, we hear elements and we see these bad news stories, but I still do not believe that represents the majority of people in this country.
I'm with you. I don't believe that it's irredeemable, but I do believe we're going downhill. So, Robert, thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight on GB News. Now, an idea that's been put forward that I completely agree with, which is we're sending too many people to university. They're racking up big debts through loans, but they're never paying them off, because for many people that are going to university who have not reached a sufficient academic level, frankly, they're being let down by everybody. The false aspiration of university education for all is a mistake. Many of them will be better off, far better off, learning trades and skills like youngsters in Germany do. In a moment, we'll find out. Can we bring some real change here?
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes, and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio, and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
A group of Conservative MPs in an organisation called New Conservatives have suggested that if you don't get maths and English GCSE, and if you can't get more than 3 E's at A-level, you should not qualify for a student loan. Now, the logic of the argument is that people with that level of academic attainment go to university, rack up debt, don't get jobs that are any better off than if they'd not been to university at all. And what happens is the government finishes up with huge amounts of money that never get paid back because those that have been to university don't earn enough. So they're saying, right, after 3 years, people should all start to pay something back, regardless of their salary. And I looked at my numbers today. I was astonished. The accumulated amount of student loan that has not been paid back is now over £200 billion. I simply couldn't believe the number when I saw it. Well, Chris McGovern is chairman of the Campaign for Real Education and former advisor to the Number 10 Policy Unit, and I'm speaking to him from Sussex. Chris, it was very difficult for years to make the argument that not everyone should go to university. Is that argument finally getting through?
Well, it's common sense, isn't it, that we have an oversupply of graduates and an undersupply of skilled workers, whether it's builders, bricklayers, engineers. And we've got to do something about it. By the way, interestingly, China has exactly the same problem, an oversupply of graduates. I've got a plumber and his daughter working for me at the moment. I had to wait 6 months, though, before they could fit me in. You know, we've got a real problem here in the lack of skilled workers. The main argument for immigration, by the way, and I mean legal immigration, is we need skilled workers, and we're going to continue to need skilled workers. So young people going to university who aren't academic, wasting their time, they're doing Mickey Mouse degrees, they're let down. It's a job creation scheme for the universities.
Yeah, no, listen, honestly, Chris, I've been saying this for 20 years, and I believe it very strongly. But there's a cultural thing here. You know, 50% or so of young Germans go on to do proper vocational apprenticeships. They learn trades and skills. In this country, the number is about 10%. How on earth do we reverse that?
Yeah, and Germany is not alone. Most of our economic competitors are doing the same. So what we have to do, I think probably from about the age of 14, is to allow youngsters to go onto what you might say is a technical vocational pathway or an academic pathway. Those are both equally valid. We're incredibly, what can I say, snobbish in this country. We have this idea that somehow if you are academic, you are superior. And yet we know, and it's widely known, I think, becoming widely known now, that, I mean, plumbers, for example, can earn 100 grand a year or even more in London. Mm-hmm. So young people who go off to university can't pay back their loan. They're underemployed. I spoke to a national conference of admissions tutors a few years ago, and the room went silent when I said, do you understand that half of your graduates are unemployed? For example, they're working in the coffee bar over the road. There was a hushed silence in the room. But when I said that after that meeting, after that conference, 3 admissions tutors came to me privately from leading universities and said, Chris, thank you for saying that, because no one else will say it. And I think these universities know the truth of it, and they should stop. Some of them should make a stand and say, no, enough's enough. And by the way, the government today are saying, you know, you need to get a grade 4 GCSE maths to qualify, or grade 4 English. That, in fact, is a certificate of incompetence. To get a grade 4 maths, you need to get, a few years ago, it was published, these figures, 15%. So
really?
That's far too low. We should have a grade 6 or a grade 7.
Yeah. I mean, look, I completely understand all of that. But, Chris, I mean, what happened here was it was the new Labour dream, wasn't it? It was sold by Tony Blair, this university education. The Conservatives supported it, and, in fact, the numbers advanced during those years. Do you think, Chris McGovern, that this government, or the next one, whatever shape or colour that may be, do you think they'll take this advice and say, look, no, you've not reached the right academic level, we're not going to give you a student loan? Do you think anybody in Westminster will actually do this?
It does take a bit of courage, Nigel. And, you know, quite frankly, I've worked with the DfE for decades, and a lot of the time I feel they haven't got a clue. And the ministers sometimes lack the courage. I think slowly the message is getting through to young people. One of the problems we have is that teachers these days don't have any experience outside the classroom. I taught for 35 years, but I did a host of other jobs as well. They need to know what's happening in the world of work. So we need to train the teachers about what other opportunities there are. Ofsted, when they go into schools, tend to evaluate exam success, academic success, and university entrance. They're not looking at how many youngsters go off and do vocational training. It is a crisis. We've got to compete with the rest of the world. We don't have a choice in this. If we don't get skilled workers, we've just got to rely on immigration. That's a pretty bad forecast.
As ever, good, plain-spoken, common sense from Chris McGovern. Thank you for joining us tonight on the programme. And I think Chris's point there, it's about courage. Ministers having courage, doing things that will be unpopular with a certain section of the population. Now, you may have noticed there are more people wearing face masks, more stories about COVID being back, and indeed a new variant has been identified. It is BA286. Yes, BA286. As a result of that, the jabs, the boosters, have been advanced by a month. Certain categories of people can get the booster from today, if that's what you choose to do. But my real What the Farage moment came last night, and it was the final, the men's final, of the US Open tennis. And there was Novak Djokovic at 36 years old, and it was an epic second set that went on for almost an hour and a half. And what amused me about him winning his 24th major Grand Slam title, which is the most that has ever been won by any man, equals the Australian Margaret Court's 24 wins as a woman tennis player. What amused me was that the main sponsor of the US Open was Moderna. Moderna, you can see the sign there on your screen. And Djokovic, of course, who was effectively put under house arrest for not taking the vaccine. That did give me a huge amount of amusement last night. And a little bit of counter-cultural thinking that comes from BNP Paribas. They are the giant French bank. And they put out a recommendation today saying, put your money into the British stock market. The pound is cheap, and there's an attractive combination of sectors and better than expected performance of the British economy. And of course, we learned last week that many of the figures that we've been given by the authorities in this country simply were wrong. Actually, we've done rather better economically during the pandemic and afterwards than many of those other countries in the G7 and neighbours in Europe. So well done, BNP Paribas, for saying, get out of the euro, get into sterling stocks, although, that aside, the London market is suffering. A lot of companies are going off and listing now in America. And once again, we see the FCA, my friends, of course, through my banking D problems, and the Bank of England, utterly failing Britain's biggest industry. Operation Sherlock has been set up on the edge of the New Forest by resident vigilantes who've simply had enough of crime, and who've lost complete and utter faith in the Hampshire Police. I'll be speaking to them live from Lyndhurst in just a moment.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo,
there'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
When the boss of John Lewis says that our degraded high streets have now effectively become looting grounds, you know something is very, very wrong. But don't think it's just in big cities or in big towns where shoplifting and stealing of all kinds is a problem. No, this runs right out into the rural parts of our country too. In fact, in some cases, it can be even worse in the rural areas. And this is why the residents of Lyndhurst and Binstead, a village not too far away from that town, have decided to do something about it. And I'm joined now by Colin Bunday, who runs the local glamping business Park Farm Holidays, and Carrie Lampitt, local resident. Good evening to both of you. Thank you for joining me live on the programme. I must begin by asking you, this operation of yours, you've named it Operation Sherlock. Can I ask why?
So my farm is right next to Minstead Church, and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle is actually buried in the church. Now, him being the author of Sherlock Holmes, one of the most famous crime fighters, crime solvers in in the UK, and we, ironically, are suffering from 84 unsolved crimes up to June this year over the last 3 years. Now, we've been doing some numbers. That doesn't include 11 that we know of that's happened in the village since then. So this is actually being underreported. Now, I think Sherlock Holmes would be turning in his grave if he knew that on his doorstep this was happening.
Yeah, no, well, it's a brilliant name, and thank you for giving us that little bit of local history. Tell us, guys, I mean, we can talk about numbers, 84, 100, and pro rata, the most unsolved crimes of any part of the United Kingdom. But what are the real lived experiences on the ground of this?
Well, 3 o'clock in the morning, somebody drives into your yard and they turn up and they just go for your garage with impunity. They're cool, calm, collected. It's as if they're on a shopping mission to take what they like. And they can, because they know the police are not going to come if they get called. They may turn up 3 days later, ask how we feel. But at the end of the day, no one's coming after them. No one's going to try and solve this. They're going to give us a crime number and expect us to go to our insurance company cap in hand.
And Carrie, let me ask you, I mean, do you feel abandoned by the police in Hampshire?
Well, I have lived in the village for the past 14 years, and I almost want to say that it got to the point where you could almost leave your door unlocked. But in the last couple of years, there has been so many incidents, and it doesn't feel like just the odd sort of opportunistic crime. It does feel like this is a real target. They're taking high-value items, electric bikes, high-value sports bikes, as well as the farm equipment on top of everything else. So I just feel it's got completely out of hand.
Yeah, and certainly from Lyndhurst, which is a couple of miles down the road from you, and obviously a bigger settlement than Minstead, reports of antique shops and many other shops suffering from looting. Now, Colin, you made a point earlier. You said that if the police do come to a crime, they come 3 days later. Do you, outside of times when there are crime, do you ever see any police?
Just lately, they've started to appear, but before that, no. Now, the police turn up, the local Bobby, he is dedicated, he really wants to make a difference. The guy is a great guy and he will do whatever he can. But he's under-resourced, underfunded, undermanned. This is organised crime. This is a crime spree. This isn't, as I said, opportunity. They need proper CID to take hold of this and to investigate it properly and find out at the root of what is going on, how is it happening with impunity throughout the village, throughout Lyndhurst. It's gone too far, to the point we are now organising ourselves and taking the matter into our own hands. This is not a vigilante group as widely reported. It's more of a community that's had enough, getting organised, using CCTV and alerts and media, social media, to say that if someone comes into this village and it's looking dodgy or it's being reported amongst ourselves, if someone gets broken into, they can put on there and we can come out, shine torches around to show that the village is awake, we're looking out, we're keeping an eye on things.
OK, so you will be physically active as a result of tip-offs that bad things are happening.
Community patrols, physically active, doing and coordinating CCTV footage so that we can basically get to the root of what's going on and hand it over to the police and give them a hope and hell of trying to sort this out.
But you do accept, I presume, that there is an element of risk and danger in this?
There'll be no confrontation. We're just going to be making sort of nightly patrols, just really making a presence, nothing more than that.
No, we don't want to be tackling these people. We want to be making sure that they're aware that we are out, keeping eyes out, reporting what's going on. It's gone too far. As I said, if we make a report at the minute, it takes 3 days for the police to turn up, and it's not good enough.
No, I completely understand that. Now, let me just read you a response that we'd have here from the New Forest District Commander, Chief Inspector Nick Marsden. And he says that recent changes to Hampshire's policing model would see the imminent rolling out of neighbourhood enforcement teams who could act quickly on intelligence. And over the past year, listen to this, over the past year, he has seen a steady decline in crimes being committed, specifically theft offences, after the force vowed to visit every burglary and chase up investigative opportunities. He also says local community initiatives, such as shop watch schemes, have been set up and that police were beginning to see results of this coming to fruition in many places, including Lyndhurst. So your local district commander is upbeat that positive change is happening and there's more to come.
Well, I think as a community, and especially a small village, which is quite a close-knit village, or both villages, Lyndhurst as well, we just like to have more reassurance. I mean, that is a scheme that I've not heard of. Might just be myself, forgive me. But I just really want to know that if we had more reassurance that something is being done, then I think people would have a lot more confidence.
I would say that reporting that crime is going down, we were done again on Friday. Every 2 weeks for the last 2 months, we've had at least 3 break-ins. This is a village of 690 people. It's not big. And we're getting done every week, every other weekend. The crime isn't going down. And we're going into the winter now when crime normally picks up in this area because it's dark, early nights.
No street lights.
No street lights. It's going to get worse.
Yeah, and Colin, dare I ask, how on earth do you get on with the insurance company if you are the victim of repeated theft?
Well, the insurance, we have NFU. They've been absolutely brilliant this time round. They paid out within 2 weeks. But this is the age-old thing. They know we now have a new set of equipment. I'm just counting the days down till they come and take it away from us again. But we know insurance premiums are going to go up. At the end of the day, we know there's been budget cuts. But these budget cuts, the money that they're saving is being passed on to us, the villagers and the landowners, because we're the people that are going to be paying higher premiums if we can get insured at all. And the money is coming out of our budgets now, not theirs.
Yeah, no, understood. Well, can I say thank you to both of you for joining me, for highlighting the plight. As I say, we hear about crime in cities all the time. We rarely hear about rural crime, and I wish you well with your project and hope that the police do live up to some of those promises and do a lot more. Now, Alistair Stewart, a legendary broadcaster. It was terrific news when he joined GB News at the outset, but he retired earlier this year, and perhaps people didn't know the full reasons why. Well, he came in to the studio yesterday on the Sunday show with Camilla Tominey and explained his medical situation.
GP, to his credit, said, I don't know, I've no idea. Sometimes people of your age, particularly if they've had a really fascinating, active life, try to find excuses because they can't quite cope with old age. But the only way you can find out is have a scan. And I had a scan, and then it was like a scene from Casualty or Emergency Ward 10, because the results came back, and I had indeed had a series of minor strokes that are called infarct strokes.
Yes.
Not the big one where your face falls down and your arm goes doolally, but it's like pepper shots. And that the cumulative effect of that was that I had a diagnosis of early onset vascular dementia.
So there we are, Alistair Stewart telling us the truth, and we inside GB News, of course, had sort of known this and certainly suspected it for a long time, and it's very, very sad. But let's remember this very distinguished broadcaster, and here is a short tribute to him.
The Malta airliner hijack has ended in a bloodbath. The Maltese government say up to 50 passengers were killed when Egyptian commandos stormed the Boeing 737 at Valletta Airport earlier tonight.
And that's news at 10. From Trevor and me, a very good night to you.
I'm Alistair Stewart, and for the first time on British television, live in front of a representative studio audience, we'll be hearing from three men, each hoping to be the leader of the next UK government in the first election debate. Over the next 2 hours, we will hear from both the candidates vying to be the next leader of the Conservative Party and, of course, our next Prime Minister. From all of us here, live in Codswell Recreation Ground, me, my friends here, a very good afternoon to you all.
Alistair Stewart, great broadcaster, great man, and we wish him well. I'm joined by Jacob Rees-Mogg. The station is diminished without Alistair Stewart, isn't it?
Oh, yes, he's a very successful broadcaster, somebody it was always interesting to be interviewed by because he has enormous charm, oodles of charm, and actually as an interview subject, that's sometimes the most dangerous thing because it's when you say the things you shouldn't.
Jacob, in 10 seconds, what have you got tonight?
We're going to do China. We're also going to talk about this extraordinary case of a 19-year-old girl who has a terrible disease and the state is saying, no, we know best, you can't have a novel treatment.
Absolutely.
And won't allow her to name herself to cover up for the hospital.
The whole thing is appalling. Let's have a look at the weather.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, very good evening to you. A band of rain's going to continue to push southwards through the next 24 hours with some showers both to the north and south of this, whilst in the southeast we're holding on to that humid air because here we are still ahead of these fronts which have something a little bit cooler, a bit more comfortable following in behind. Also on the fronts there'll be a fair bit of rain, so a cloudy, wet end to the day across many northern parts of England into Wales and southwest England too. In the southeast we're holding on to those humid conditions and we could see a few showers developing. Also some showers in the far north of Scotland and Northern Ireland. Cooler here, whilst in the southeast with that high humidity, temperatures not dropping a huge amount. As we look through Tuesday, a damp, wet start across many parts of England and Wales, though in the southeast a good deal of brightness. Though with the high humidity, I am expecting a few showers to kick off here, and they could be heavy, perhaps even thundery, whilst a brighter picture across the bulk of Scotland and Northern Ireland, a scattering of showers and a little bit of cloud at times too. A bit cooler than it has been through some recent days, getting to highs of around 24, perhaps 25 Celsius in the southeast. Wednesday morning may get off to a bit of a chilly start, couldn't rule out a touch of frost across some parts of Scotland, but otherwise a generally fine day for most until some wet and windy weather pushes in from the northwest as we go into the afternoon. That rain's then going to sweep further southwards later in the week, and temperatures are going to be much closer to average for the time of year than they were last week.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.